Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today for today's webinar, IDEA, the Competitive Advantage. My name is Lisa and I work on the People and Culture team here at Sentinel Benefits and Financial Group. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone following the presentation. We will have time for question and answers at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions, and we can get to those at the end. Without further ado, I'm really thrilled to introduce Delight Deloney, today's speaker. She is the Executive and Enterprise Relationship Director at the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM. In this role, she's responsible for overseeing the fostering and promotion of memberships, educational programs, certification and services focused on advancing the profession of human resources and creating better workplaces for all. Prior to joining SHRM, Delight was an experienced HR professional specializing in an array of topics like people development, leadership, coaching, program management, project management, change management, organizational design, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She holds a master's in human resources and industrial relations, as well as a master's of social work and a bachelor of social work. So without further ado, Delight, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you guys about this topic on IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and the competitive advantage that it brings to organizations. You know, there's been a long history of discrimination and bias in the workplace. And in this session, you guys are going to hear some examples of best practices, some practices that we've seen in workplaces that have not been great practices, and the impact that it has on potential and current employees, as well as the impact that it has on the business and the bottom line of the business. And lastly, we'll review some techniques to help you recognize and overcome bias while creating opportunities for self-reflection and improved workplace culture. When I do these sessions, I like to make sure that you know that this is a conversation. So there'll be several times throughout the presentation where I'll say, you know, put a question in the chat for me or raise your hand and let me know your thoughts. So please be prepared to be interactive with me. Again, my name is Delight Deloney, and I'm an Executive and Enterprise Relationship Director at SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. And I'm really excited to be with you guys. Just to share a little bit about SHRM, what our purpose and mission and vision is. We have one purpose, and that purpose is to elevate the profession of HR. Our mission is to empower people and their workplaces to advance HR practices. Oh, sorry about that. With over 300,000 members, SHRM is the largest human resource management association in the world. And our purpose is to elevate the HR profession with the mission of empowering people in workplaces by advancing HR practices and maximizing human potential. Ultimately, our vision is to build a better workplace and a better world that works for all. In this video that I'm about to show you guys, you're going to get a picture of how the world is experienced from this one man's experience and his perspective, and how so often perceptions and lack of understanding cause people to get it wrong. So I want you to take a minute to look at this video and really focus in on what you're seeing. So a lot of times it's that old adage, we judge a book by its cover. We judge a book by our bias. And when we do that, we get it wrong. So before we dive into IDEA, or inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and I'm going to refer to it as IDEA as we continue on, I think it's important to establish a general foundation of each meaning. Inclusion describes the extent to which each person in an organization feels welcome, respected, supported, and valued as a team member. This means ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, opinions are considered, and that they feel the value that they bring to the team. Their value to that team is evident. Diversity is, in the employment context, is defined as the collective mixture of differences and similarities that include, for example, individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, backgrounds, preferences, and behaviors. So diversity is much larger than just race, sex, and preferences. Equity in the workplace refers to the fair treatment in access, opportunity, and advancement for all individuals. Work in this area includes identifying and working to eliminate barriers to fair treatment for disadvantaged groups, from the team level through systematic changes in organizations and in industries. I'm going to show you a depiction. On the screen is a depiction of what equality is and what equity is, because a lot of times people see the two and they use them interchangeably, and really it's not the same. When we talk about equality and equity, this is a great depiction of what that means. Equality puts everyone on equal pedestals, while equity provides everyone with a pedestal that allows them to have the same experience and views as everyone else. So if you ever think or you question, what's the difference between equity? What's the difference between equality? Or why does it matter? This is a great depiction to remember why equality and equity are different and how they impact individuals in your organization, the individuals that you encounter. So now let me define access for you. Access means approaching or entering a place. Access and accessibility refers to equitable access to everyone, regardless of their ability or their experiences. This will eliminate real and perceived barriers and cultivate and develop and advance the talent pipeline. If you can't get to the door, then you cannot enter the door. One way we've seen this is accessibility ramps versus steps, or you may have steps and a ramp. That way it's accessible to someone who is walking or someone who is in a wheelchair. So that's what access is. Now, when you think about these four concepts and we put them under the umbrella of diversity, right? I want you to think about it from this perspective. Diversity is inviting someone to a party. Inclusion is asking them to dance. And equity allows you to dance with or without a partner. And then we take it one step further. We also play their music, which plays into access and belonging. It leads to better workplace culture, which leads to greater outcomes. Access is also about providing the resources and the opportunities that people need based upon where they are. A lot of times we get it confused, and we want to give access and opportunities to people based on how we perceive the landscape and not based on where they are. And so one thing I would hope you guys will take away is that when you're looking at access, you're meeting people where they are. Simple examples are pools of potential workforce who have access to get to the workplace. And one thing that we are finding in businesses across the nation now is the being in the office versus working virtually, and we saw that countless employees found that having the option to work virtually was better for their lives, and it helped them to do better jobs in the workplace when they didn't have the access to getting into the workplace. So on the screen, you'll see Forbes's top 10 employers for diversity in 2021. If you look at this list, there are a variety of industries on this list. You see IT, healthcare, finance, education, a lot of different industries from different focuses. And you might think, well, what do they have in common? How did they get on this list? Many of these companies that you see on this list have the 4 qualities that you see on the right side of your screen. Many of these companies have established resource groups, which gives employees an avenue with like-minded individuals that provides resources and tools for the company as it relates to that particular group, and educating the broader population. And so when we think about, a lot of times when people think about resource groups, they tend to think, in order for me to be a part of this resource group, I have to identify with this resource group. So for example, if your organization has a resource group for women in leadership, men may think, I can't join this group because I'm not a woman. You may have a group that is Black employees resource group. And if you're non-Black, you may think, well, I can't join this resource group because I'm not Black. But that is not true at all. The purpose of the resource group is to give that population a voice. And if you are an ally, if you're a supporter of that group, then you're also welcome to join that group because you're helping to move the mission of that group forward in the organization. Another thing that you'll find about these employers that are on this top 10 list is that they focus on mentorship for all to create an environment for learning. They also demand partner diversity because companies have to mirror their stakeholders. When companies look at their stakeholders, their stakeholders are not just one uniform group of people, it's a variety. And so they want to make sure that their organization reflects that. And then you'll find that they think about inclusion, diversity, equity, and access differently. For them, it's a part of their culture and it's a way that they do business. So now let's look at some numbers. In this study, this study was focused on Black and employees of color. And we found that 45% of Black employees and workers of color say that their workplaces discourage discussion of racial justice issues. 46% of Black and employees of color believe that their workplace is not doing enough for them in the organization. And 49% say that racial and ethnic discrimination and ability discrimination exists in their workplaces. 49% is nearly half of that Black and HR professional of color population. That's a big number. Now, when we look at the statistics on workplace culture, this report surveyed American workers to explore the impact of workplace culture on both the well-being of workers and the bottom line of business, which also plays a role into engagement. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. And here we found that 49% of American workers have thought about leaving their organizations because of the impact that that workplace culture has had on them. 49% of Americans, not just African American or people of color. So now we're looking at almost half the population in the workforce. The research uncovered a critical skills gap at the management level, and these skills gaps are negatively influencing an organization's culture. We've all heard that about 67% of employees who leave their organizations leave because of what? Poor management. Not the business, not the work that they're doing, but because of the management, the culture. SHRM found that employees hold managers more than leadership or HR more responsible for the culture of the organization. And we tend to find that because you have direct communication, direct interaction, direct engagement between employer and manager. And when you see that, you look at the culture of the organization if this manager continues to behave this way. For those reasons, we found that 1 in 4 people dread going to work, don't feel safe voicing their opinions about work-related issues, and don't feel respected and valued in the workplace. So I want you to keep those things in mind as I talk about this next number. $223 billion. That is the cost of workplace turnover due to culture over the past 5 years. Toxic workplace cultures cost companies significant dollars in turnover as well as absenteeism. With 20% of the US employees leaving their jobs because of culture, we can do better and we can inspire cultural change. And I hope that that's what you'll take away from this presentation today. So what are some things that impact the numbers? What do you think impacts the numbers? And that's a question for you to think about. Cultural awareness or the lack thereof plays a role. Bias, whether it be conscious or unconscious, discrimination, or just simple lack of understanding can play a role. So how do companies begin to foster inclusion? How do they foster diversity, equity, and access? Some key actions can be simple solutions, such as defining guidelines and principles that can be lived by all. For diversity to broaden, actions toward changing the organization's culture, such as focused hiring and promotion practices, can have a really positive impact on greater diversity in leadership, which then impacts idea in the organization. So I want you to think for a second, what are some inclusive behaviors that you have taken? What are some inclusive behaviors that you've seen taken? And what are some inclusive behaviors that you've experienced? So now I'm going to shift a little bit. And I want to talk about a concept called microaggressions, which shows up a lot in organizations. If you can click the raise hand icon on the screen, how many of you are familiar with microaggressions? And Lisa, if you'll tell me what you see, that'll be helpful.
Yes, we have 14 and counting, 15.
Okay. Nice. So I'm glad to see that about a quarter of you know what microaggressions are. So a microaggression is an act that stereotypes or denigrates the recipient. The slight can be subtle, that neither the victim nor the perpetrator knows that it is happening. Microaggressions may be intentionally committed by well-intended people who are unaware of the hidden message being communicated. When microaggressions take place, they make you feel like the other. They can be subtle, and like I said, people necessarily don't even know that they're doing harm. But I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some microaggressions. You're so articulate with this air of surprise. When I see you, I don't see color. You don't sound Black. You don't look Jewish. I would have never thought you were gay. Those are a few examples of microaggressions. And those are actually more common, and those are the ones I hear of often when I talk about IDEA in workplaces. So I'm going to click through a couple of pictures. I want you to meet a few people, and they're going to share what their experience with microaggressions are. So as I click on them, I want you to read what you see on their page. On the screen, you have an Asian woman, and her sign says, "No, where are you really from?" You have a biracial female on the screen, and her sign says, "What are you?" And then her response is, "I'm human. Being biracial doesn't make me a what." Next, you have an African-American male. "You don't act like a normal Black person, you know." You have a Hispanic woman on the screen. Her sign says, "You don't speak Spanish." Next, you have an African-American woman on the screen, and she's wearing a head wrap, and her sign says, "So what does your hair look like today?" As the person reaches for her scarf to remove it so that she can see her hair without her permission. Next, you see an African-American woman on the screen, and she's holding up a sign that says, "Why do you sound white?" These are more common microaggressions that people experience in the workplace and in the community. So how do you recommend someone deal with a microaggression? One response is to use the BAR approach. Breathe, acknowledge, respond. Breathe, take a deep breath. This helps you to relax, because if you experience a microaggression or you witness a microaggression, that can cause tension in you. So you want to take that moment to breathe so that you can relax, and it gives you time to form a cohesive thought instead of blurting out what may be an unfortunate remark. Plus, it's physically impossible to take a breath and talk at the same time. So it gives you that moment to breathe and to think. Acknowledge what the other person has said, and shows that you've heard them, and it doesn't mean that you are agreeing with them. And then you respond calmly, and when the timing and the setting is appropriate, explain to them how the comment was offensive. One key in being able to work through the BAR method is to make sure that you have a workplace that is conducive to these kinds of conversations, to the difficult conversations, so that someone can respond and know that their leadership backs them. So a question for you, and I just want you to think about this: what can you do? What should you do? What can HR do or should do about microaggressions in the workplace? My response would be, again, making sure that you have a workplace that is conducive to having difficult conversations. So when people use microaggressions, or excuse me, when they use microaggressions, they fail to understand the impact that it has on the recipient. When made aware or confronted about the behaviors using the BAR method, you often hear, "That wasn't my intention," or "I didn't intend to offend you." However, the reality is there was an offense, and it's the impact of that offense that's important to recognize and acknowledge. Intent at times can be irrelevant. It's the impact that counts. So when we look at bias and discrimination, when we talk about these two in the workplace, what messages get heard by the recipient? When talking about what individuals who had experienced incidents at work that made him or her feel unwelcomed, excluded, discounted, or disadvantaged because of their race, their age, their gender, their national origin, religion, physical or mental disability, and other factors, including medical conditions or pregnancy or marital status. Based on the stories that we heard, we identified several ways in which people discriminate against others. Whether the discrimination was subtle or overt, those who experienced it heard the messages that you see on the screen. Don't be yourself. Employees are discouraged from revealing their true selves. A gay married woman, for example, knows not to talk about her wife or is expected to dress in a more feminine manner. You're not considered credible. And employees are interrupted or discounted or excluded or passed over for high-profile assignments or promotions. Just kidding. A manager or coworker makes a biased comment to a colleague and tries to pass it off as a joke. Anything goes after hours. Managers or coworkers make racist, sexist, or intolerant comments or jokes about others. And they think that it's all right because they're not talking about someone specific in the workplace or because it's after hours. And I think that if there's anything we've learned in the last few years is that whatever you say can come back with social media, and it can have a negative impact on you. Gotcha. Excuse me, you're not welcome. You're unwelcome. An employee, here you'll see that employees are excluded from conversations at work or from social gatherings. And sometimes information is withheld, information that they need to do their jobs and to do well gets withheld. That message is you're not welcome. Or gotcha is another message that they hear. A manager or a coworker seeks to tear down a colleague or believes those who disparage the coworker, even if the disparager lacks credibility. The manager may be unduly harsh with the worker and easy on others. What they're saying is, I got you, I can get you. And another message that gets heard is unconscious bias. Oftentimes you'll see women, older workers, or minorities are told that they lack executive presence. How many of you have heard that one or witnessed that one? Maybe you said that one. But it has a negative impact on the hearer or the recipient. So this particular group of people are told you lack executive presence, you don't fit the culture, or you're too aggressive. Even though their performance might be seen as exemplary, if the performance was done by a white person, a male, or a younger employee. So if you're in a position of leadership or influence, how can you confront bias? And again, that's a question I want you to reflect on. When people experience bias, discrimination, microaggressions, and they hear these messages, this can lead to what is known as covering. So I'm going to ask you guys for a quick second. You can, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of the concept of covering? What are you seeing, Lisa?
We're at 10, about
Okay.
10, so a few less than microaggressions.
Yep. So what do you think happens when an individual feels that their identity is not welcome in the workplace? One response is covering. And in the minority community, this is called code switching. Covering is a defensive mechanism that occurs when an organization recruits a diverse workforce, but consciously or otherwise promotes assimilation rather than inclusion. The subtle, if unintended message is you're welcome despite who you are, not because of who you are. We want you to be a part of our organization because you're diverse, but when you get here, we want you to be exactly like us. Covering is more common among underrepresented groups, but it's also exhibited by white men who want to cover their age, mental health, or physical health issues. Part of the work of inclusion is helping those already in the workplace to feel safe to bring themselves to work, versus what's historically been done, such as downplaying parts of themselves for the purpose of assimilation. So do we want a diverse population? Do we want an inclusive environment? Or do we want everyone to be exactly like us, to think like us, to work the way we work? How does that incorporate the idea of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access? Covering affects workers' behavior along 4 dimensions: appearance, affiliation, advocacy, and association. With appearance, you'll find that they alter self-presentation to blend into mainstream. An example of this would be a Black woman may choose to straighten her hair to de-emphasize her race. Affiliation. People will avoid behaviors associated with one's identity. So a mother may avoid talking about her children because she doesn't want her colleagues to think that she's less committed to her work. Advocacy. People tend to avoid sticking up for one's group. So an example is a veteran may refrain from challenging an inappropriate joke about the military. An association, how do you cover your association? Sometimes you'll see that people avoid contact with other members of their group. So a gay man may avoid bringing his same-sex partner to a work function so that he's not seen as too gay. Covering can lead to employee dissatisfaction in the workplace. I want you to think for a second, if you had to cover any part of who you are when you go to work, what would the impact be on you? Besides the psychological cost to the individual who engages in covering, this represents a tremendous loss to the organization. Unique perspectives and insights that these employees can offer as members of a particular identity group, which is a key value that a diverse organization can leverage, are instead suppressed. And organizations miss that key part of that person by having a toxic workplace culture that causes that person to think, I've got to cover who I really am so that I can fit in to this space. So does bias impact the workplace? It absolutely does. Bias has a tremendous impact on individuals, which in turn has a costly impact on the organization. So we're talking about the bottom line of the organization, right? In a report, we found that in the workplace, we start to find out the bigger story of how bias impacts the bottom line. And we found 3 main costs to the workplace. Burning out, where people were feeling alienated, they were withholding ideas and solutions, and not referring people to their workplaces because they were burned out. Or busting out, where they were planning to leave their employer within the year. They were on the job looking for other jobs because they needed to get out of there. So they were busting out. And the last is blowing up. Discuss their you found that these employees discussed their employer or their place of employment in a negative way, whether it be on social media, or they fail to follow through on work assignments, so they're less productive. Disengaged employees have a 37% higher rate of absenteeism, an 18% lower productivity rate, and 15% lower profitability. If an employee's salary is $60,000 per year, disengagement would cost the company $20,400 a year in loss. So that $60,000 salary turns into $80,400. I want you to think back to that big number I showed you a few slides ago, 226 billion. This number feeds into that number. This is because of disengagement, because of the impact of bias on idea in an organization. So how do we move from words to actions? You provide training in the workplace. And training is not about teaching white people about people of color or people of color about white people and how to engage. No. Training is about educating everyone and creating an inclusive workplace by understanding and recognizing bias as it pertains to inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Next, decision makers should promote self-awareness and mindfulness, going back to the concept that I talked about earlier of creating a space where difficult conversations can happen. And lastly, you want to implement systematic safeguards at times when bias is likely to occur. You know, so much has happened over the last few years where we have seen more openness around bias. And when we see things happening in our communities and in our worlds that might lend to that, that's the time to input systematic safeguards, providing that space where people can have open conversations, difficult conversations. They're getting training about what's happening around them so that they have an awareness and understanding. Why does all of that matter? Because it's about an inclusive workplace culture. We know that inclusion is important for human reasons. We know that diversity is important, equity is important, access is important, all for human reasons, because it helps those already in the workplace feel safe with bringing more of themselves to work. How many times have you said, have you told someone, or you've heard, or you've been told, bring your whole self to work? You can't do that in a workplace where you don't feel safe. It's also critical for business. Companies need every single person's knowledge, skills, and overall input. But employees won't bring all of this unless there is a trusting relationship between the employer and the employee. When this trust and relationship is built and the culture becomes inclusive, equitable, there's access and it's diverse, there can be significant business benefits. A culture that includes all four of those aspects are 2 times as likely to meet and exceed financial goals. They're 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times as likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times as likely to achieve better business outcomes. So when you think back to that big number, 226 billion, and you think about these numbers that you see on the screen, there's a case for having a workplace that is inclusive, equitable, diverse, and provides access. Here are two additional factors on the business value of an inclusive workplace. According to a survey by Deloitte, we found that the proportion of executives who cite inclusion as a top priority rose by 32% over a 3-year period. In another study, we saw that companies with the most ethnically diverse executive teams are 33% more profitable, and found that companies with more women in executive positions have a 34% higher return to shareholders than those that do not. And what's more, companies with the most women directors have a 26% higher return on invested capital than those with the least amount. And 37% of the employees who were surveyed believe that gender diversity means better business results. There are so many reasons that an inclusive, equitable, diverse, and accessible workplace culture matters to companies in helping them have that competitive advantage. What are some of the things that SHRM is doing in the workplace to help it be more inclusive? Information, access. In a diverse workplace, competitive advantage is realized not by merely acknowledging diversity, but also by creating an environment of inclusion where employees work toward a common objective while feeling supported. And this results in a greater productivity and employee commitment to the organization. So now I'm going to talk about 5 ways that IDEA creates that competitive advantage. Creating a work environment that hosts a diverse talent pool is attractive to clients, to job seekers, and investors alike, because it provides a competitive advantage. A diverse team is difficult to replicate and offers a number of benefits to the business. And here's just a handful of them. 1, it strengthens a different perspective. Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, once said, "The team that sees reality the best wins." Hiring talent from the same schools and businesses or even states can mean that your company culture may become saturated with like-minded people. And remember, I asked you earlier, do you want a team where everyone thinks alike and looks alike? Or do you want there to be diversity among that team? Sure, that might mean that everyone gets along and can be nice. That said, diverse companies know that true magic happens when you bring people together with different backgrounds and makes it safe for them to express their unique perspectives to help everyone more accurately see that reality that Jack Welch mentioned. The key to the success of any business is their people. Your ability to attract and retain top talent has never been more of an imperative, and the issue of diversity and inclusion has become a differentiating factor. In a 2017 survey, 54% of women and 45% of men said that they researched if a company had a diversity and inclusion policy before taking their most recent job offer. That's half the population on both sides. A further 61% of women and 48% of men said that they access the diversity of the company's leadership team when deciding to accept an offer. So putting this simply, by promoting diversity and inclusion and access and equity, you can improve your chances of bringing in great people, and not just bringing them in, but keeping them. Increased innovation. We're talking about creating that competitive advantage. So number 2 is increased innovation. A Josh Bersin report suggests that top-ranking inclusive workplaces in the HR sector are 7 times more likely to be innovative leaders in the marketplace. Deloitte also reported that when employees think their organization is committed to and supportive of diversity and they feel included, employees reported about 83% better ability to be innovative. Everyone around the table contributes their unique worldwide views, which leads to more opportunities that would otherwise be invisible because we're causing them to cover and to not share what they bring to the table. So no matter what your business is, your ability to continually innovate and improve your offering is essential. And how well you do that is rooted in your workplace diversity and inclusion, access. Once you have top talent, you want to get the most from those folks. If an employee believes that their organization is committed to and supportive of diversity, it improves their ability to be innovative. And furthermore, the study also reported that feeling included within a diverse workforce leads to improved team collaboration. Third, effective teams. Google launched the Project Aristotle a few years ago to study 180 Google teams. They conducted over 200 interviews and analyzed over 250 different team attributes. One key thing that top performing teams had in common was the ability to create psychological safety. When there is psychological safety, team members feel safe to voice their opinions, even if it's contradictory of those around them. They're more likely to ask for help, or they make mistakes and they know that they can learn from those mistakes. Companies that embrace diversity, inclusion, equity, and access naturally encounter more differences in opinions and are given more opportunities to create norms that foster psychological safety in their organization. Improved customer service also equates to happier customers. Deloitte reports that companies that succeed in creating inclusive and diverse environments lead to a 31% uplift in employees' responsiveness to customers' needs. And when that happens, what happens? You have happy customers, and happy customers are returning customers. And finally, number 5, boosting the bottom line. A McKinsey & Company report across 180 companies in Europe and the United States concluded that more racially and ethnically diverse companies were 35% more likely to have above average profit gains. The combination of effective teams, increased innovation, and happier customers directly impacted the bottom line. And further down the road, developing a reputation for all 3 of those things creates an ideal company culture that attracts highly talented people. And not only attracts them, but it keeps them. So when talented job seekers are knocking down your door to make the recruitment process smoother, further decreases the cost of increasing margins. All of the above are benefits if capitalized on, and should be capitalized on, of course, leads to improved financial performance for that company. Part of the McKinsey study revealed that companies ranking in the top quartile for diversity within their executive boards achieved a 53% higher return on investment on equity. On average, those positioned in the bottom quartile of the boardroom had less diversity. So there is a method to the madness. There's a reason that IDEA is so strongly talked about and sought after in organizations, why companies want to be more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, more accessible, because they know that it impacts their bottom line. And so you may work for an organization and you have a diversity and inclusion plan, or you may not, or you're trying to figure it out. SHRM can help with that. SHRM is at the forefront of providing tools and resources on the topic of IDEA. And so when you have a chance, go out and visit the website, and you'll see the resources that are available to you by going out to the website, shrm.org. You click on resources, and then you search for DE&I. And when you do that, you'll find that we've created a DE&I plan that you can easily implement in your organization. Let's see. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if we've got any questions.
Thank you, Delight. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a couple of questions. I don't know if any more will come in, but I can start with one that we received through the chat. So this person says, my small consulting engineering firm is struggling with DEI. The past 2 years, we made an effort to hire more than 50% interns who are diverse. We just had a few female partners retire. One of our clients is not happy with our current board and wants to know what we're doing about DEI issues. Any advice on how to respond to this client? We do have plans to professionally develop more females and have quite a few females as associate partners, but it will take time.
It sounds like recruiting is an area to focus on. And, I mentioned earlier, when if you're hiring everyone from the same school, the same background, same area, then you're going to have similarities. Look outside of your normal places. See what historically Black colleges and universities might be in your area. Reach out to some of them. There are organizations in each state and cities where they focus on a particular population. For example, in HR, there is the Black in HR organization. So connecting with some of those organizations will help with recruiting.
Thank you. We have another question that this is back to one of your earlier slides about the high percentage of people who leave jobs because of the culture of the workplace. This attendee wants to know if you know the definition of culture that poll used.
So when we talk about culture, we're talking about what is, I want to be politically correct, right? Organizations have a face. And if you find that you have a turnover in a particular area, there's something in the face of that organization that is causing that particular group to not want to stay. And so you have to sometimes take a step back and look at the culture and maybe redefine the culture. And so if you don't know what the culture of your company is, it might be time to redefine it or to define it.
We're getting a couple more in as we're going. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a good question and something that I know I've thought about in our organization. How do you create successful resource groups when you have a small organization? This person has about 300 staff and many work in the field.
Oh, that's a good question. What I would suggest doing is maybe sending out a survey to employees and getting their input and their feedback. And the other information that you can get from the employees also, you might be able to identify some leaders of those resource groups. So if you have a few resource groups in mind, reach out to your employees and hear what their thoughts are about resource groups, how it might benefit them, and go from there. So start with a survey to find out what employees want.
Okay. Got a couple more in the chat. This one says, what are other firms doing to foster and cultivate inclusion when it's the most difficult one to implement? I don't know if that means out of the idea, but anything you've heard from other other firms? I know you touched on some of it from those top companies, kind of the different areas that they're implementing.
Really go back to those 4 things that I shared, and Lisa and Angel do have the slides, and they're welcome to share them with you guys. But go back to those 4 areas and see what your organization is doing around those areas. Great.
Here's another one. This is interesting, kind of about reframing people's expectations. So this person says, we're at a mostly male, especially at the top organization, a smaller company. What about expectations like men at work leaving dishes in the sink, expecting women to do them, or at least the women end up doing them? How about tasks assigned? Of course, the women should order the coffee or lunch. How about not inviting women to guys' executive meetings, especially during golfing events, even though the executive women also golf? So this seems like more of definitely a gender-based issue, but reframing those expectations.
It goes back to having those difficult conversations in the workplace. It sounds like the male leadership may not be aware of it, or I don't want to say that they don't care, but if they're not aware that this is the perception in the office, is that there's this male-female hierarchy, the conversation needs to be had. When you go out to our website, there is, under DE&I, there are conversation starter cards, which provide some topics that you can start the conversation around, and some tips on how to get the group and the conversation going.
That's all I'm seeing for questions, unless we have any last minute ones coming in.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I'm going to put a link in the chat.
Is it the link to the website with the cards? Because someone just asked for that.
Okay. Yes. Yes. And I won't usually stop doing a presentation, but based on some of these questions, I want to make sure you guys have this link to go to. Okay.
As you're typing, we had one last question that came in. Mm-hmm. How can you diversify when your geography for at least a 20-mile radius is not very diverse? I know immediately what's springing to mind for me is the potential of some hybrid or remote positions, but I know that it's not feasible for every organization.
And if hybrid, so you have to think about, when you think about cost, right? Could you allow someone outside of that 20-mile radius to work remotely or hybrid? Or could you look outside of that 20-mile radius and maybe pay for relocation for someone who might be interested in working for your organization?
Oh, they're a vocational high school, so maybe kind of that relocation piece might make more sense. All right, I think that's about it. We're right at the top of the hour, but I want to thank you personally so much, Delight. This has been awesome. I know I've taken actionable items I want to take back to my team, and so really appreciate your time today and all the insights that you shared.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
And just a reminder to everyone, this recording will be sent out as well as the slides. So thanks so much for attending.